want to bring in our panel of political commentators now. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Andrea Van Vugt is a Conservative commentator, and Kim Wright is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Let's talk about leadership as we watch what's unfolding in the country. Susan, let me start with you. Everyone in the country is watching these protests, wondering about the leadership required to return order to the streets and to reopen international border crossings. What more can the Prime Minister, what more should the Prime Minister be doing right now to bring these protests to an end?
Well, Peter, there are a number of things that need to happen at the leadership on multiple levels. And I think the first is in my opinion, there was a failure of leadership at the police level municipally in Ottawa that enabled this all to happen. We all know we can't get on Parliament Hill on Canada Day. You can't get near it. You can't get near the Cenotaph on Remembrance Day. So there was a failure of leadership, I think, at the municipal level, and there'll be lots of investigation into that after. I think now all levels of government are engaged, though I'm hearing that Doug Ford is still not engaging, at least at the trilateral table with the feds and the province, or his ministers may be engaging, but at the highest level in the Ontario level, where the jurisdiction is for the removal of mask mandates and the removal of mandates of groupings that these occupiers are asking for.
Right.
He's not at the table.
He's making the case. Look, this is a local policing matter. Let the local police take care of it.
Well, it is a local policing matter, but it's bigger than that now. You know, I walked down the street today, and I was speaking with some of the people, and there was one guy who was basically insinuating that there were awful and worse things that were going to happen. When you have 140,000 plus auto workers, plus all the ancillary factories and things that can't work because of these truckers' blockades, that's beyond a municipal policing matter. The province needs to get involved as well. But I don't think the province or the federal government should be making public health decisions based on bullying. That
okay, so
based on
the way you're okay with the way the Prime Minister's he's done what you think the Prime Minister has been able.
No, I think I would have liked to see Minister Mendicino and Minister Blair out sooner. I think and they have been the faces and voices. The Prime Minister has been in question period. He's responded to media questions. Like I said, I don't think responding to bullying is the way to deal with things. So I think the government is doing what it's doing, but most of it is behind the scenes. All
right. I want to hear you on that, Andrea, and as well in this context. The Conservatives backed the protests initially, and now they're calling for an end to them. So tell me how Conservatives are showing leadership on this issue.
I think I agree with a lot of what Susan has said. I think that the failure at multiple levels of government, the municipality, the police service, the provincial government, the federal government, politicians, to help take the heat out of the convoys, which has simply led to an increase in the number of convoys really across the country, that's creating not only an international trade problem, but also a bit of an international relations problem. We see the governor of Michigan out today, ironically asking us to open our border when we have our own border crossing issues with Michigan. But I think, this is a complicated problem that, started as part of the mandate, the vaccine mandate for truckers crossing the border. But I think what it's evolved into now is more of a protest against COVID, the pandemic, the restrictions that have been imposed by, all of the provinces and the federal government. It's a bit of a statement against the frustration and challenge.
Fair enough, but that was evident early on in the protest in Ottawa. There was more than a truckers' protest, and I guess I'm wondering whether Conservatives need to acknowledge that to some measure their support for the protest enabled the protest to continue.
I don't believe that the Conservative support for the protest led the convoy to continue or inflamed it. I really don't.
All right, Kim, let me hear from you on this.
Well, I appreciate Andrea thinking that, but the reality is the Conservatives have been sucking and blowing on these convoys from the beginning. And that's been evidence for the last week. Aaron O'Toole loses his job. Candice Bergen comes in. They go have peace with the protesters. Andrew Scheer goes out, takes some pictures. It's all sorts of sucking and blowing. So here we are. The police in Ottawa did not believe that this was going to be a thing, and it is clearly a thing. Last weekend, the city of Toronto has really went in and said to the protesters, you are not going to come into the city and wreak havoc the way you did in the city of Ottawa. That has been where you see in Toronto really got a hold of the demonstrations, gave them their space to protest, but then also moved it along. We didn't see this in Windsor. It got its own feet under it at the Ambassador Bridge, and that is going to be really difficult and challenging to get out of this. And so ultimately, yes, there is provincial responsibility. Doug Ford has a whole series of highways and an entire police force that should be at the table talking about how we deal with these protesters. He's not there. But this really does need to be a tripartite response, and really everyone needs to get on the same page.
Susan, the Prime Minister today again rejected requests from opposition leaders to have a meeting with them to try and look for solutions. He's being pressed again to provide a timetable for lifting vaccine mandates, even from a couple of his own MPs. And I guess here's the question. Are we just going to see this unrest in the land continue? Because here's what... I mean, it's a question of sort of reading the room, I guess. Here you have a Prime Minister being pressed to give us a timetable for when at least the mandates he's responsible for federally are going to disappear. And that's against a backdrop of all kinds of other provinces opening up. So people are enjoying freedoms in different parts of the country while a federal government is still preaching caution and restraint. So how does that message get through that the Prime Minister is sticking to in the face of what's happening in other parts of the country?
Peter, let's remember throughout the pandemic that it was up to every province to impose the jurisdictional restrictions that met their public health issues or realities and the data and the science that was available. That was never the Prime Minister telling Alberta what to do or telling PEI what to do or telling Scott Moe what to do. Each of those premiers have always done their own things. We saw what happened when Jason Kenney threw open Alberta in time for Stampede, right? They got whacked right back. So the Prime Minister isn't now all of a sudden going to step into provincial jurisdiction. I heard the Public Health Officer for Ontario say today, they're looking at the data, they're looking at where the trends are going, and they're going to make public health decisions based on the science.
Okay, Andrea, let me hear you on that. Everybody claims to be following the advice of the health experts, and when the premiers are doing it in many of the provinces, the advice they're seeing is to say, let's open up and lift restrictions, and maybe it's a different message at the federal level.
Yeah, I just want to address the comment earlier. I think it's a bit naive to think that if the Conservatives had not expressed some interest in willing to talk to and meet with the convoy participants, that they would be gone now, right? Like, that's not why this has continued. It's continued because the folks that are still, occupying Ottawa and the Ambassador Bridge and the Coutts Land border and the border between Manitoba and the United States, they're there because they feel as though they're not getting hurt. And what's ironic, actually, is that given all of the protests are occurring at the same time that provincial governments are starting to actually loosen some of the restrictions. And so in that context, you wonder, at what point, at what plan does the Prime Minister, the federal government, and the health experts have for loosening or lifting some of those restrictions? And I think laying out some sort of a plan, some sort of a vision for the future would take a lot of the air out of the frustration of lots of folks that are saying we need to move on.
Okay, Kim, Wright, let me hear a final comment from you on that. Is it reasonable to expect the Prime Minister to put some sort of plan, timetable for lifting the federal mandates?
I think everybody has looked for that since the beginning of the pandemic. This has been a communications failure of epic proportions at every level of government across the country all throughout the pandemic. That being said, they also have to be very careful about being, embracing this sort of mob mentality. And Premier John Horgan of British Columbia yesterday did a press conference saying, look, we're not going to make public health decisions based on honking of horns in front of the legislature. That's not how this is going to work. So there does need to be a better approach to this. There needs to be more transparency of how decisions are being made. And ultimately, these Scott Moe's going to now lift these restrictions, or Jason Kenney is, or what have you, without any backing up of evidence of why they're doing it, is just as foolish as putting in restrictions without evidence in the first place. But they're really going to have to wrap their hands around this, because ultimately we're going to keep seeing these types of convoys if they think that this will be the way to move government policy.
All right, we'll leave it at that for our conversation today. Thank you all. Good to talk to you all, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Thank you.